the reason why anyone would want to become an agent, live a life of a slave, is because this is a route to power. It's a way to remain safe in areas which are unstable, or it could actually be a reward. The Middle East has never been independent, really. Since Britain and France came to the region, since the end of the Ottoman Caliphate, this region has been dominated by tribes who've had more loyalty to Western powers than they have to their own people. With Pakistan, she's the abused wife in the relationship. America goes to her when she needs her, but then other times she's swearing at her, she's abusing her, and the Pakistani leaders just can't see beyond America.
We have an interesting podcast for everyone today. It's common to hear the term agent rulers, vassal states, client nations. It's common to hear that states aren't independent, but rather they answer to Washington, London, or Paris. So today we want to look at this topic of agency and how to make sense of it. Here to make sense of this is Geopolitics founder Adnan Khan. Now, Adnan, I probably have asked you this question a number of times about agency, about agent rulers and vassal states. I think now it'll be interesting to unpack this whole topic. I want to remind everyone before we begin that we are available on all major social media platforms where you can subscribe and you'll never miss a thing. Adnan, I think a good place to start is, where does agency fit into the broader subject of geopolitics?
Broadly speaking, this discussion of client nations, vassal nations, and agency, it fits into the realm of foreign policy. So, you have a nation, it has a foreign policy, it engages with the world. That nation may even be an empire. Now, how does it maintain its global position? How does it maintain the global empire? And this is where the concept of client nations and agency comes in. So you can either conquer the world, which will be very costly, which will require huge military deployment, which will be very costly. Or what you can do is win over client nations where they effectively do the legwork in implementing your foreign policy. So this is why it's actually important to understand this concept, because it does play a big role today, and it has throughout history in terms of politics and interaction between nations.
Is that the main reason nations would want an agent ruler?
So there's a number of reasons, actually, and I think probably a good example to look at is the British Empire. The British Empire at its peak near the end of the 1800s, it was managing a population of about 450 million people, half a billion. And for that time, that was absolutely huge. This required a huge administration in their colonies. It required a massive deployment of their military forces. And we've got to remember that colonies were for profits. So the more expense it took to occupy and run the colony, you're eating into your profits. So for Britain, having agent rulers or an agent nation or a client nation, it was a solution to territorial occupation. You can either send your forces around a lot of countries around the world, or you get an agent ruler, you win him, you build him, and they do the legwork for you. So it now means your forces can be somewhere else, or you don't need to deploy that many forces. Now, if you're not going to occupy a country, then you do need a ruler to implement your policies. So a good example of this is the relationship between Pakistan and America. America began the war on terror. It needed Pakistan to implement this in South Asia, which Pakistan did. And even though America deployed a lot of troops in the region, it would have had to deploy even more if it wanted to implement the war on terror directly itself. So in many ways, having agent rulers allows you to indirectly rule, not directly, so you avoid the costs. Now, agent rulers, their job is to control the population, to accept the political solutions from the major power. So if you take Egypt as an example, America gives lots of money to Egypt. Egypt is a client nation for America. So America doesn't have to put troops in Egypt. Egypt does it for it. And it's a decent return on investment as far as America is concerned, because, for example, America wanted Egypt to normalize relations with Israel, which it has. And the job of the regime there is to control its population who are against this. Now, if this wasn't the case, then America would have to put troops there. And how many countries are you going to put troops in? You can't put them everywhere in the Middle East. And then finally, we see, for example, the British Empire, in the end, it became quite unprofitable for them to have troops all the way around the world, but the colonies were becoming too expensive. So if you do everything yourself, if you occupy everything yourself, it's going to be very costly. You're going to lose some wars. It's going to drain you. So the solution to this is you have agent rulers. So this is why the powers in the world, they want agent rulers, because it's an indirect way of ruling and it's a more cost-effective way of ruling.
So I get why a nation would want agent rulers. It makes sense. It's more cost effective. They're doing a lot of the legwork, so you don't have to. Why would someone want to become an agent ruler in the first place? Because isn't it like living life like a slave against your own people, always constantly being fearful of someone coming to overthrow you?
Yeah, it's a good question. There are a number of reasons, actually, why someone will become an agent. And you're right, it is to a large degree a life of a slave, and who'd want to do that? And so when we look at history, there's a number of reasons why individuals or families actually did this. So we see due to rivalries, someone may be prepared to become an agent ruler because it will give them power. So we see across the Middle East, many tribes, they used to fight each other. And what they did was they turned to a global power in order for them to be in power. So they're prepared to implement the agenda of that foreign power as long as they can remain in power. So a couple of examples, this is the Kurds in Syria, the Kurds in Iraq, they literally have rolled over for America and they implement America's agenda. But in return, that's their way of getting into power. So although they don't really have full power yet, you have the Kurdistan government in Iraq. That wouldn't be possible unless they were agents to America. And now we're seeing in Syria as well. They effectively control the northern areas of Syria because they've been working with America. Another example is Benazir Bhutto. She grew up in Pakistan, went and studied in America, and she put herself out for services to America, that I'm a better option for you. If you support me to power, I will be a good investment for you. I'll implement your agenda. You can rely on me. So in these examples, because these individuals wanted power, they saw the best way to get power was to have the backing of a global power. So nobody can really challenge you internally now because you're backed by that power. In other cases, we see safety, for example, in coup-prone nations or countries with an international struggle, a family and a ruler may turn to a foreign power in order to remain in power. And probably the best example, these are the Gulf states, Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, UAE, Oman. You find all of these tribes, that's what they were originally, they turned to the British in order to get into power. But these tribes used to all fight each other. And that's why the MBZ family in UAE, the Saud family in Saudi, the Al-Sharaa family, the Khalifa family, all of these Gulf states, in order for them to be safe and secure, they turn to a foreign power, and the foreign power return the favor by putting them into power. So as long as they implement the foreign power's agenda, the foreign power is more than happy to back them. And the third and probably the final example is sometimes there could be a reward by a foreign power to put you in power. And the best example of this is the Hashemites in Jordan. They fought against the Ottoman Caliphate, the famous Lawrence of Arabia story. Who was he working with? He was working with these Hashemites. And their reward was they were given two nations. In the end, they were given Jordan and they were given Iraq. In Iraq, the family got overthrown in the end. But in Jordan, the Hashemites are still in power. So the reason why anyone would want to become an agent, live a life of a slave, is because this is a route to power. It's a way to remain safe in areas which are unstable, or it could actually be a reward.
You gave the example of the British Empire, Lawrence of Arabia, the Hashemite family. Is agency still relatively a modern phenomena, or is it something that's kind of existed since politics has existed?
Yeah, absolutely. It's not a modern thing. It's actually existed since the beginning of time. The Romans had protectorates. They had agent rulers. We see the Arab tribes, some of them were agents to the Prophet, may peace be upon him. The Prophet's companions who came afterwards, even they managed to win over some of the tribes who effectively were agent rulers. They were clients to them. You see the Ottomans throughout the Balkans, they also had client nations as well. And then when Western imperialism rose, what we see is they even had agent rulers. Sometimes they rule directly. Sometimes they have client nations. Probably probably the major difference throughout history was the imperial powers, because of technology, because of industrialization. They're a bit more sophisticated in how they did this. In the olden days, it was you come and pay tribute, we're going to give you security. You're under our authority. Now what you find is more sophisticated, to the point where rulers, some rulers look independent, when actually really they're serving a master. So no, it's absolutely not a modern thing. It's something that really, as you said, it's existed since politics.
So you gave quite a few different examples. When I think of agent rulers, I always think it's negative. It's that the people don't have their own political will. They're not able to determine their future. Am I right in saying that, or is it to differing degrees depending on who the master is in this relationship?
Mm-hmm. So, agency, I think the understanding people have is like a master-slave relationship. The master orders and you jump. And there's always been this question. You look at some leaders, they seem to have quite a lot of independence, but the country clearly is not independent. And what you find is that throughout history, there was a very master-slave relationship, to the point where if you were an agent ruler, your master will remind you regularly, I'm your boss. They will cut like the wheat distribution. They will take more taxes, for example. But what we find now is things are a bit more sophisticated. And that's because communication technology, transport technology, the West largely has invented a lot of the technologies we've had for the last 200-300 years. Industrial technology, for example. So anyone who wants to develop, you're going to have a relationship with the West. The other thing also is that if you need agent or clients, you got an empire, you do need capable individuals who can manage their population, and they can implement your foreign policy goals. So if someone's just a slave, the likely chance is they've got no capabilities, they've got no skills, they won't be able to serve you, they won't be able to control their population, and they won't be able to implement your foreign policy goals as sophisticated as they are. So the master-slave relationship was fine at one time. In the modern era, you actually need leaders who can control their people in a sophisticated way. You don't need rulers all to be like dictators. They need to be able to rule them, even come across independent to them. So that requires a level of capability. So that shows you that, just being master-slave isn't actually suitable really in the modern way. In many ways, I would say you don't want a Hamid Karzai, who was the first leader of Afghanistan when it was occupied by America. He was even his bodyguards were American troops. This guy had absolutely no independence. In his country, he had no credibility whatsoever. That's the level he went to. Literally, America did everything for that guy, yeah? And in the end, it didn't really help him. What you want is someone like Erdogan or Sisi, where they come across as though they've got power, they come across as they can manage their people, but what they do is they also serve you as well. So that's a bit more sophisticated, and it's a much more stable way of you maintaining your empire, and you occupy, or you indirectly controlling other countries. So people think they're independent, their leader looks independent, but actually he's serving the foreign power as well. So yeah, we've come some way since the whole master-slave relationship of the past.
One thing that does come to mind is the movie 300, where the Persian went after, I think it was the Persians, they went after Sparta, didn't they? And I guess that was them wanting Sparta to be a agent ruler, ultimately. Would that be correct?
Yeah, so in ancient times, what you find is if we're coming, so you got an empire that's growing, you're on the frontier of the empire, they're going to come and conquer you. So you've got a choice now. You either go to the imperial palace and you say that, look, I'll serve you, I'll be an agent, and you'll try and come to some sort of deal, which is don't conquer us, but we'll be loyal to you. In other cases, what you find, for example, with the Persians and even the Romans, is there was conquest. And obviously, Greece had its own history. It thought it was a power. So you had this. I think despite there were times where Greece paid tribute to the Persians. There were other times where they fought them. So obviously Persia, all the way in the Middle East, the further you went away from the center, the more difficult it became to maintain your occupations. This is where you need agent rulers. So in the past, you just have to conquer with brute force. In the modern day now, you can use economics, you can use technology, you can establish a global system and bring people into it. So today, the difference is it's just a bit more sophisticated. It hasn't actually changed. It's still the same. It's just a lot more sophisticated.
It seems like in modern times, correct me if I'm wrong, the agent rulers have a little bit more space to make their own decisions, or is that just a facade?
So there's a couple of things here, really. If I'm the ruler of an empire, when I'm looking at a nation, there's two things we can really do. Fundamentally, we want that nation to implement whatever our agenda is in that particular region. Now, we can do this in two ways. We can either control that country's foreign policy. So whoever the ruler is he serves our agenda. The other option we have is we don't just control their foreign policy, we actually get involved domestically in that country. So the level of control goes far deeper. And what you find, it depends there, because some countries, the British Empire example, like in India, they literally ruled half the country themselves, and the other half, they're princely leaders who were like agent rulers. So there was part occupation, part semi-independence. Whilst in other occasions, what you find was there was no domestic control. It was purely your foreign policy has to be in line with us. And then in return, we'll give you some sort of security or no. So there's pros and cons with both. And also it depends what sort of power you are. If you're everywhere in the world, you're a big power, you need to control things more indirectly. You have to prioritize which country is important. So we take the example of the British Empire. They directly occupied India and they directly occupied Egypt. These were important territories. The Caribbean, they also directly ruled over. But you find in Africa and the Far East, although they occupied some places, other places it was very indirect. So this depends now on your foreign policy establishment, the level of skills you have. And then also there's a reason why in a country maybe where you've just got some element of control, you might want to get more control of the domestic situation. Where you've got a ruling family, like in Saudi and the Gulf countries, they control everything. You don't need to get involved domestically. They've got that under control and they're not under threat from anybody. So in that scenario, as long as the foreign policy is in line with yours, you don't really care what happens domestically. So you find in the Gulf nations, for example, the West don't get too involved. The ruling families there, they control everything domestically. Their family has the key positions, but their foreign policies are all in line with the West.
How does a power, so you mentioned the British, you mentioned America, how does a power gain political influence over another state? How does that relationship form in the first place?
So it can be a number of ways, but the important thing to remember here is what is political influence? Why is any power even trying to do this? Now, political influence is the ability of a power to change the behavior of another nation so that that nation accepts and implements the political plan the power has. So the only obstacle to that really is the population, because they may not agree with it. So you need an agent ruler now to control the population and implement your agenda. So the classic example of this has been where you put someone into power. So if you look at Saudi Arabia, it was the British that put the Saud clan into power. If you look at the Gulf leaders, it was the British who put them into power. If you look at India, Muhammad Ali Jinnah, you had Nehru and Gandhi, it was the British who put them into power. So that is one way you do it. The other way is that you support the army and the army does a coup and the army is backing you. What we find with Britain and America specifically is that they don't put their eggs into one basket. They know a ruler could die. They know a ruler may become disloyal to them. So what they tend to do is they back an individual, his family, but then they also build other individuals or families as well, because they may need them in the future. So this is part of the foreign policy work of these nations. And the way you fundamentally do this is you need to control some key elements in a nation. Now, how you do that, and it will differ from country to country. So if you want political influence in a country, so it implements your agenda, then you need to, at some level, control the ruler, whether it's an individual or family, the state, the institutions of a nation, the political medium, and the military. So political influence is about controlling these key levers. And naturally, in any country, how much you control this can differ, and how much you control them can go up and down as well. So if some key individuals pass away or they're assassinated, then the level of influence will go down in that particular country. So a good example is Ukraine was part of the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union collapsed, so its influence over Ukraine reduced. And as its influence has been reducing, America and Western influence has been increasing to the point now where Russia felt it has to invade the country to regain its influence. Whilst before, Russia controlled the economy, controlled the political parties there, the political medium, controlled everything. So political control is about controlling or influencing these key levers. And that's a hard job. It's not a straightforward job. And it could be you rely on one individual, it could be you rely on a family, or it could even be you rely on a military as well. And I think Ukraine is actually a good example of this.
So you mentioned Ukraine, but the other countries that you mentioned, they've mainly been actually from the Muslim world. Is this something which is predominantly found in the Muslim world, i.e. agent rulers, or is it actually quite common elsewhere in the world as well?
So yeah, it might appear like that. When you look at the world, the Muslim world, a lot of them seem to be agent rulers, but actually it's not unique. Although that is, it's a correct observation. The reason why it's a correct observation is because it just shows you how important the Muslim lands are. You look at the Middle East, you look at South Asia, you look at the Far East. These are important territories. There are immense resources. The world's gas and oil is still in the Middle East. So that's why for Britain and France and America and Russia and China as well, the Middle East is really important, because even if you don't need the oil directly yourself, the world needs oil. So if you control these countries, you control a strategic commodity. So if we look historically, it was really the Middle East we have today. It was Britain and France who created the Middle East that we have. What they did was, specifically in the case of Britain, when Britain had the empire, it had to go from the UK to India. And the way you do that is you go around Spain, you go down the Mediterranean, and then you've got a couple of options. You go through the Tigris or the Euphrates, or when the Suez Canal came around, you go through there. So you have to go through the Middle East to get to India. So when Britain was doing this, what Britain realized is we need ports. We need to be able to get resources and resupply when we go to India. And this is where they started making links with all the tribes in the Middle East who are along the route. And the Middle East tribes, they were rivals. They used to all fight each other over water and resources and things like that. And then what Britain did over time is it rewarded some of them with their own countries. And that's the countries that we have today, whilst others lost out. And then when America emerged as a superpower after World War II, America then targeted other families, or it targeted the militaries in order to get influence. So the way Britain and America and France have had influence in the region is by making links with the tribes and putting them into power. Arming them and building them. And that's why, these military deals that you see between Saudi, the Gulf states, this is how they gain influence.
One question that I had was, obviously it's been a long time since Britain's been a superpower, but it still really managed to maintain those links and influence globally. Is there something fundamental to what Britain did to actually maintain those links, even though its importance on the global stage has greatly diminished?
So I think what you're asking is, what's unique about these English people, yeah?
Yeah.
No, so what you've got is, Britain was an empire, so Britain had to maintain that empire. And because Britain was a small island with not too many resources, what Britain realized is they need to manipulate and work with other people. So what they did was, after industrializing, when they went out to the world, they did that. They ran their empire on a shoestring. In fact, it's quite shocking. I was just reading a few weeks back that when Britain was ruling over 450 million people, that was the peak. Britain only had an army of 250,000 personnel. Literally, how do you run an empire that big with that many people or such a small military? But what they did was they made use of local rulers, they built them, they made use of local tribes. And in the case of India, what they made sure was no one tribe fought them. What they did was they used tribes and factions to fight each other, so they weaken themselves. So if you take the Gulf leaders, if you take the Hashemite family, they're only in power because of one reason, which is Britain put them into power. So they remain loyal. Britain has developed their education system. Britain still provides them with security. Britain has deep relationships with them. So you see the royal family regularly goes out to the Gulf. The Gulf princes all come to Sandringham to study, to get military training. So that relationship's been blossomed. And that shows you that just because you're the world superpower doesn't mean someone's going to become an agent for you. A lot of it's based on relationship. And the Hashemites, for example, they owe everything to Britain. They've never been in power. I mean, Jordan's a fake country, shouldn't even exist, really. Never has in history. I mean, if you're to ask what is a Jordanian person, well, actually, it's hard to tell you because there's no specific land called Jordan. It was literally just, or more, there were lines drawn between France and Britain in the Sykes-Picot Agreement. So because Britain was quite sophisticated at this, and these countries still exist today, so these countries are still loyal to a large degree to Britain because they only exist today because of the UK.
We've gone through quite a few different points, but the thing that I don't think we've highlighted is, okay, how do we identify an agent ruler? I mean, you mentioned a number of different countries, and to be honest, a lot of people would probably mention these countries, but is there a specific criteria to say, okay, this person is an agent ruler, this person is acting on their own free will?
So I would say there's probably two key things you need to look at to identify if someone is an agent and then who they're an agent for. The first is who brought them to power. So if they came into power on their own, then that could indicate they're independent. But what you find is a lot of individuals and families, they come to power because there was a foreign power that brought them to power. So that's the first criteria. And the second one, the most important one, is the whole reason any power wants agent rulers is you're going to implement their regional agenda. You're going to be part of their foreign policy implementation. So whose political plans are these rulers supporting and implementing? That's probably the key criteria. So that's why it's important. You need to understand what is every power's agenda in different regions in the world. Then you can look at, okay, who's implementing it? Who's become part of the cog in its implementation? So if you look at the Middle East, for example, you know, America has a plan. I mean, today there isn't really a counter plan to America's strategy. So you can have a look at which rulers are part of it. So we are probably, days away from Donald Trump going to the Middle East. He's going to meet Saudi, he's going to meet Qatar, he's going to meet UAE. You can work out what America's plan is because America's quite open what its long-term agenda is. It's about Israel's stability. It's about creating a new architecture. It's about creating a economic corridor. Okay, so who's implementing this? Who's becoming part of the process? And that's probably the best criteria.
You mentioned people coming into power. How do they come into power? I guess a good example is Ahmed al-Sharaa, Syria. I don't know if you can kind of give a bit more information about him in the context of agency.
Yes, so Ahmed al-Sharaa is now officially a pop star. He's everywhere. His army fatigue is gone. The suits come on. It seems like the world can't get enough of him. He has just recently been in France, and he's actually trying to get a meeting with Trump when he goes to the Middle East. I think by the time this podcast goes out, we'll know whether Trump met him or not. The key thing with Ahmed al-Sharaa is for someone who is ISIS, who fought in the Iraq War. He's from Camp Baka, this famous prison where all the ISIS guys came from. And all of these guys went on to do some very interesting things. And Ahmed al-Sharaa is from that camp. And interestingly, it was through work with Turkey that they were able to overthrow the regime. And there, again, so many question marks come up that show he's not independent. You know, 13 years the Arab Spring happened in Syria and nothing happened. And in 2 weeks, the regime fell. And Ahmed al-Sharaa, we know his background. He's ISIS. I mean, I'm shocked at how he's being treated now. For someone who's former ISIS, it's just like, oh, let's just forget his past. He's all right now. He's perfectly fine. And we've seen already now there's talk of he's been secretly talking to Israel, which is the agenda of America in the region. So all the signs are really there. I mean, the fact that we don't know a lot of his history is itself worrying as well. Because in what realm would you put someone in power or elect someone who you have no idea of his background? So that itself is actually quite revealing, actually, what's happened. And again, this is, I mean, Ahmed al-Sharaa is unique because a group getting power does happen. But what you tend to find is in the Middle East, especially, families military officers, these are the guys that usually take power. And what you find is America, Britain, France, they work with these families for a long period of time and they try and get them into power. You've got Ahmed al-Sharaa, one individual guy who, managed to get to power. And to be honest, everything's against him. He doesn't even control the whole country. He's one warlord. So what's going on is whoever's got him into power, which appears to be America, whether it's directly or indirectly, they're also managing and protecting him as well. If he doesn't work out, it's not a problem. You get another agent ruler. And that's the thing. We mentioned, isn't the life of an agent a slave? It isn't. It can be. But to one degree, once you've outlived your use, you're going to be gone. No one's going to care. Even your master doesn't care because you're just a means to an end. And that's the important thing. An agent ruler, a client nation is a means to an end. They will abandon you. They will leave you. That's what can happen.
How's the US managed to win over so many agent rulers? Because it pretty much runs the world.
Yeah, so America's done it because America, after World War II, emerged as a superpower. It is an empire. And then you have to maintain your empire. There's been no empire like America for a very long time. So that's why America targeted agent rulers. They targeted them in the Middle East. They targeted them in the Far East, in Africa. I would say America's strategy really since World War II has largely been, because what they found was a lot of the key countries in the world, the rulers were controlled by Britain and France. That's what they found. So the way they dealt with this was they backed military officers to undertake coups against them. So we saw this in Iraq. We've seen this in Iran in the past. We've seen it in Africa. We've seen it recently in a lot of countries in Africa where France was the more powerful country. So America has spent a lot of time training, building up military capabilities. They use the intelligence services or to make contact with military officers, and then they do a coup. Because building an alternative to a French-backed family or a British-backed family can be long work, can take a long time. The other thing you've got to be careful, if you win one individual, that individual could get killed, his family could get killed, and you lose everything. So what Britain, France, and America have learned is you don't want to put all your eggs in one basket. So getting a couple of military officers to do a coup is quite a good way because they will take over and then they'll get the whole military in line. So yeah, because America as an empire it has to do this and it's been pretty successful. So one indicator of America's decline would be is that America's losing its agents, that other countries are successfully winning over America's agents. That will be an indicator that America's influence is on the wane.
Once a ruler kind of accepts that position of being an agent ruler, can it actually ever break free from its master? Is that a possibility or no chance?
So yes, an agent ruler can break free. However, the power puts structures in place to ensure that doesn't happen or makes it extremely difficult. So interestingly, if America needs an agent, that shows you how important that country is. So if the ruler can build a domestic base for himself, if he can make sure that the levers of power in his control, he then could break free because America's control in that country was through him largely. But what America usually does is they make that country dependent upon foreign loans, foreign technology, on foreign aid. So if that ruler ever tries to do an independent one, America can pull those strings. So one way you can break free then, if that's the case, is you become an agent for another country, which in effect is not really breaking free. You've just changed your loyalty. But when rulers have only one interest, which is I want to be in power, well, you don't really care who you're an agent for. You just want to be in power, don't you? So yes, rulers can break free, but it will take quite a capable guy. And we've seen in the past where some rulers have tried to break free, they've been assassinated or they disappear in certain circumstances. Or what you find is the foreign power backs another faction and a revolution occurs or the ruler gets overthrown. So yes, they can break free, but it's not just they make a decision, I want to break free and they can break free. Actually, they're going to have to deal with the level. So if America hand goes really deep in that country, they've got influence within the state, in the institutions, in the military, in the political medium, then it's going to be hard for the ruler to break free. If America has very little influence, or if that ruler makes sure he has influence over all these factors, then he can potentially break free.
I want to go into some specific countries now, specific realities. We've already discussed Syria. I'm just thinking about the Middle East and countries that I would actually say they seem to be an agent ruler. Egypt, can you tell us a bit more about Egypt? I know previously Gamal Abdel Nasser, it seemed like he was more aligned with USSR, but today they seem to be more pro-US. Can you tell us a bit more about Egypt?
Yeah, so when the US emerged as superpower after World War II, and it was interested in oil in the Middle East, it looked at this region and it saw Britain quite dominant in this region. So they actually targeted Egypt, that Egypt was a good place. If we could get influence over Egypt, then Egypt would be a good launching point to change the whole region. And at that time, what you had was a monarchy in Egypt, a monarchy that Britain put in power and supported, although it was not very popular within the country. So what America did was, through the CIA, they reached out to army officers. They reached out to guys like Gamal Abdel Nasser, who absolutely hated the monarchy. They felt the monarchy was an embarrassment to Egypt. And eventually these officers, they took power. And really, since 1953, when they took power, they have actually been in government. Since then, the military still controls the country. Now, what happened with Gamal Abdel Nasser was America wasn't just trying to win Egypt. What they wanted to do was reshape the whole region, and they wanted the Egypt to really lead that. So they needed a leader that was capable. They needed a leader that can win the Arab street. And that's why they didn't just pick any old army officer. They picked someone who was quite capable. The other thing was that the Cold War was beginning in the 1950s. So America was worried that they didn't want the region to become communist, to join the Soviet Union. So really, Gamal Abdel Nasser had two things that America needed him to do. One was they wanted him to do something about communist expansion. And then the second thing was they wanted him to chase down the rulers that were loyal to Britain and France, and to remove them or weaken them or to win their loyalty. And so what Gamal Abdel Nasser did is he did two very interesting things. He won the Arab street. So as a result, even Arabs in other countries, they wanted their country to be aligned to Gamal Abdel Nasser. And then the second thing he did is he actually opened up relations with the Soviet Union. He welcomed them in. He took their money. They built dams. And actually, they became quite close economically. But the aim with this was to get the Soviet Union invested to the point where they become overstretched in the region. So what Gamal Abdel Nasser did with the help of America was to come across as being pro-Soviet Union and actually working with the Soviet Union in order to actually get them engrossed in the region. At the same time, the way he won the public street was he's anti-imperialist. So he was coming with statements that are anti-American. He was coming out with statements that were anti-Israel. But that was the image he created. In reality, it was actually America who put him into power. In fact, the guys that put him into power, they're all dead now, from the CIA. They wrote books. They actually wrote books on how they built Gamal Abdel Nasser, how they built into power, how they maintained his power. So this isn't like even an analysis point. This is where the guys who actually put him into power, they've actually spoken about this. So Gamal Abdel Nasser is actually a good example of how the inner workings are. The only thing probably different with today was, in the 1950s, a new Middle East is emerging. Britain and France are weaker nations. You didn't really have strong leaders in the Middle East. If you look, you had monarchies everywhere, in Iran, in Jordan, in Iraq, Iran, in Jordan, in the Gulf, in Saudi. So these monarchies, they weren't very strong. The Saud family was still worried about the Hashemites, that they might want to take over this land. So this was fertile ground for America to build army officers to come and do a coup. And that's why today Egypt really is still in the American camp. We actually know now that the USSR was aware that Gamal Abdel Nasser is an agent of America. But what they tried to do was they wanted to win him over. They wanted him to be an agent for the USSR. And the way they tried to do that was by building dams, by giving him Soviet equipment in order to try and win his loyalty. But what happened was when Egypt went to war with Israel in 1967, they were defeated so badly that the way it looked was that Soviet weaponry, Soviet military equipment can't stand up against Western equipment which Israel had. So a lot of this was really a mirage. And it shows you that if I've got an agent, I don't want people to think he is an agent, because if they do, then they would potentially overthrow him. What I want people to think is he's independent and actually standing up against me, and then still under that guise use him to achieve my goals.
The other country in the region, which is interesting, is Saudi Arabia. I know we discussed earlier that the British brought the Saud family in. Where do we stand with Saudi Arabia?
Yeah, so Saudi Arabia, as I mentioned, it was one of those tribes, one tribe amongst many in the Middle East that used to fight each other. And the original Saud leader, he had a vision, he wanted power. And when the British came knocking, because they wanted to make links with the tribes in order to get to India, he was the first to reach out to them. And the reason why it was is he wanted the British to arm him so he could fight the other tribes against power. And he was quite ruthless in what he did. And then obviously he aligned with the religious faction there, the Wahhabis, to give himself religious cover. So since that time, what the original Saud did was he intermarried into all the other families. So they're now with him. They're not against him. And once oil was found, they were sorted. Before oil, they were still worried the other tribes could fight them. Once oil was found and oil was developed, they became very rich. It became their personal wealth. So what you find was during the Cold War, all of these countries in the Middle East, they were on the Western side. And that's why Britain and America, although they were competing in the region, on the Cold War, they were on the same side. But as we saw now, as Britain declined over the years, America has managed to get more influence over the leaders. So MBS is very close to Trump. His father was also very close to America. You had King Abdullah in the past, who actually was close to Britain. So you find that depending on where the king comes from, depending on what his position was before, that would indicate which country he's loyal to. But it looks as though now, really, America's got a firm grip over this country. And it's not even like Saudi even hiding it. They're loyal to America. MBS actually said in an interview not long ago, he was interviewed by, I think, the Washington Post. And they asked him that, your uncles who backed jihadi groups back in the day, don't you think they went a bit too far? And he goes, yeah, we did go too far with supporting jihadi groups and the Wahhabism in the country. But then he said something very interesting. He goes, but the reason why we did this is because this is what America told us and asked us to do for the Cold War. Meaning the reason why we built mosques around the world, meaning the reason why we supported jihadi groups, because this was America's Cold War strategy to deal with communism. So that's a good example of agent. You're implementing a foreign power's agenda. You're part of them implementing that agenda. So yeah, Saudi, despite having the most strategic resource in the world, despite having the capabilities to build anything with the wealth they've got, what you find is the Saud family just want a throne. And if that throne means we have to work with America, they're prepared to do that.
I think you're going to upset a lot of people with that answer. So let's move on. Iran seems like it's fairly independent, actually. It's creating a space for itself. It's got its own agent rulers, I guess. What do you make of Iran?
So Iran's public image is independent, it's anti-imperial, it criticizes America regularly. But we don't measure politics through statements on their own. We have to look at the actions that they're doing. And what you see is in Afghanistan, when America invaded, Iran and America worked together. In fact, the north of Afghanistan, it was Iran that maintained stability there. In Iraq, when America got bogged down, all the Shia groups gave up their weapons and they joined the American established political setup, to the point where America actually handed over Iraq to Iran. So what you find is, despite all the public statements, in the region, they've actually been able to work together. And I remember Iran's leaders, reformist leaders, Khatami Rafsanjani, they used to always say that, look, in Iraq, we don't want Saddam, America doesn't want Saddam. In Afghanistan, we don't want the Taliban, America doesn't want the Taliban. And they actually used to say, look, we can work together. Now, how do you now marry this up or reconcile this with the public portrayal? Well, the public portrayal is for a reason. It's for people to think Iran's independent. It's for people to think that we should support Iran because Iran has an independent agenda. This is part of the agency makeup, that you need people to think the country is independent. But if people can see you're not serving us, the Iranian people, you're serving America, then they'll overthrow you. So that's why America had a very big role to play to even get the clerics into power. So Iran is a country, up until World War II, really, it was Britain that controlled this country. It was Britain that actually changed the name from Persia to Iran. And what Britain did in the First World War, it needed Iranian oil, because it was BP actually that first found oil in the Middle East in Iran, and they were developing the fields. And Iran's rulers at the time, they had imperial rulers, they were quite weak. So after World War I, what Britain did was they put a military officer Reza Shah into power. When World War II was coming again, Britain wanted to make sure it's got a regular supply of oil coming from Iran for the war effort. And Reza Shah, he seemed to like the Nazis for some reason. So what they did was they occupied the country, they overthrew him, occupied the country. When World War II finished, they then put his son into power, Mohammad Reza Shah, who remained until 1979. And what happened was, obviously, after World War II, Britain declined as a power. And actually, it was America that built Iran's intelligence services, it built their military, because Iran was a key supply line for the war effort. So America was giving supplies to Iran, and then Iran was supplying Russia in the World War II effort. So as a result, America had to get involved in Iran, it got involved in its military, in its economy, everything. However, what happened with the Shah is he saw his country as independent, and actually he was criticized. So famously in an interview, he actually threatened America. He actually said to the interviewer that, I can hurt you more than you can hurt me. And that's when America realized we've got to get rid of this guy. This guy is basically probably becoming independent. So what America did with all its intelligence in Iran, they concluded that the most organized faction in the country is the clerics. So Khamenei and these guys. And when America met these guys were like, yeah, support us into power, and we won't do anything against you. So since that time, really, despite the public portrayal, Iran's actually been supporting America. The only probably caveat we need to have here, even if America didn't exist, Iran will still have ambitions for the region. So Iranians believe that they should have their own empire in the region. What the clerics have concluded is that by working with America, we can serve them and we can also get our empire as well, because America can hurt us in the region. So that's why you find sometimes the Iranian officials, they're very critical of America. But what we see time and time again, Iran has actually aided America, whether it's in Iraq, whether it's in Afghanistan, whether it's in Lebanon or the broader region. In fact, one of Netanyahu's arguments has been with America, why can Israel not expand? Because they're going to look at Iran. Iran's in Lebanon, Iran's in Palestine, Iran's in Iraq, Iran's in Afghanistan. So how come they're allowed to have an empire, but Israel's not allowed to have an empire? So when you look at the statements that come from Iran and America, and you look at the actions, they're completely different. And this is how agency works, really, in the modern day.
I find that a little bit confusing, because obviously Israel is a close ally of America, but Iran and Israel are opposing each other. If they were both really agents of the same country, wouldn't you find that they would work together better?
So this is what we call the balance of power strategy. How do you maintain a region without having to occupy it? Well, what you do, you have different competing powers, and you make sure none of the powers individually can become the dominant power in the region and overthrow the others. So America supports Iran by working with them in different countries. It militarily supports Israel. It militarily supports Egypt. It militarily supports Saudi as well, and the Gulf countries. And the way it scares the Gulf countries and Saudi is Iran's becoming strong. The way it keeps Israel in line is Iran. The way it keeps Iran in line is Israel. And America's on the other side of the Atlantic. So this is how balance of power strategy works. What you do is you create competing powers. So Syria and Iran, they are considered the state sponsor of terrorism in the region. And Israel, the peaceful nation. Egypt's the American ally. Saudi's the ally. But this can change. Before 1979, Iran was the key player in the region for America. They had a good relationship with the Shah. Yeah. So these things can chop and change. We've seen in Syria now, you've had change now. The Syrian leader was supposed to be this anti-imperial guy. Now you've seen that change. And that's because agent rulers can chop and change. So this is how the balance of power strategy works. Look, America has to create an image that we're not interfering. It's these countries. They hate each other, they don't like each other, and we're going to try and engage in the region and be a useful country. They don't want to give the real image, which is we're a colonial nation, and actually we're the ones supplying both sides. I mean, famously, when Iran and Iraq went to war in the 80s, America supplied both sides. And one of the American generals said that it's actually in American interest, yeah, that neither countries win, that they drain each other out. So we have had this example before. So yeah, this is real politics. I think people got this thing that politics is principled. What countries say is what they do. No. What countries say is the complete opposite to what they're really doing.
What about the Middle East, more broadly speaking? Because obviously there's a few other countries. It seems like the UAE is becoming more prominent the last few years. Give us a quick overview of the Middle East.
Yeah, so the key countries historically in the Middle East was Iraq, it was Syria, it was Egypt. Now, obviously, it's completely shifted. You've got Saudi, you've got the Gulf countries, really, who are emerging. Probably the key thing is Britain and France created the region, the country that we have. America emerged a power after World War II, and America and Britain entered really into quite an intense Anglo-American struggle, which was really America trying to remove the British-backed rulers in the region, largely the monarchies. And America largely succeeded at that. If you look, Saddam Hussein's gone, the monarchies Britain has is gone. Even the Gulf leaders, some of them are probably still loyal to Britain, but America has got such a level of control where these rulers have no choice but to work with America. So really what you find is the Middle East is really under American control. And unless another power emerges and challenges America, tries to get agent rulers, really, I can't see how the region will get out of America's grip, unless America implodes and America can't support these rulers anymore. But yeah, the Middle East has never been independent, really. Since Britain and France came to the region, since the end of the Ottoman Caliphate, this region has been dominated by tribes who've had more loyalty to Western powers than they have to their own people.
Let's move over to a different region, the Indian subcontinent. We're recording this just a day or so after the escalation between India and Pakistan. Where do we see these two countries? For me, it seems like India is very closely allied with the US, and Pakistan, which was very close to the US, seems like it's shifting its allegiance, its loyalty towards China a little bit more. What do you make of this?
So when partition happened in 1947, what happened was there's no agreement between the different factions. So between Jinnah, who's representing Muslims, you had Nehru and Gandhi representing the Hindus, although they said they were representing Indians, and then you had the British. Because there was no agreement amongst them, in the end, Britain partitioned it the way it wanted. And what ended up happening is most of the military equipment, most of the resources ended up in India. So Pakistan actually got very little, and that's why there was an economic crisis straight away in Pakistan. So the conclusion Pakistan's first leaders came to, or founders came to, was the quickest way for Pakistan to develop now is to align with America in its Cold War. The Cold War was emerging. And so that's why you find the first few years, all the Pakistani leadership spoke about, all Jinnah spoke about was, we've got a threat of communism. Communism is a big threat to us. And when anybody asked them where, they could never give you an answer. So before even Pakistan was created, the agenda of the Pakistani founders is the quickest route to development is to side with America. Now, when America looked at the region, the Cold War was about to begin, and they look at South Asia, and India is the biggest country. So what America wants is to win India over, and India become the bulwark against the spread of communism. So, you're looking at China and Central Asia. But Nehru and Gandhi were a bit independent in their thinking. Nehru and Gandhi's view was, we don't want to be on any side. We want to have a good relationship with everybody. We don't want to be good with America, not be good with Russia, and vice versa. So what America did from that day is been trying to win over the loyalty of India. It's been providing them with equipment. It's been providing them with military technology. But India has never aligned with America. So America had to settle with Pakistan in the end. They got second best in the end. So I think in the 50s, there were some major military deals made between Pakistan and America. And America made it clear from day one that this military equipment is not for you and your problem with India. It's for the Cold War. So when Pakistan and India went to war in 1965 and America found out that Pakistan used American tanks, America put sanctions on them. And actually, relationship reached rock bottom until the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan in 1979, where America needed South Asia again. And that's where they mended relations with Pakistan again. And then you see with the war on terror, they did the same thing again. So only really when the Soviet Union collapsed and India realized we're getting no more equipment and no more aid from Russia, then they opened up their economy and American companies came over. So now, since then, really, America's relationship with India has changed. India's more aligned with America now. In fact, America's finally got what it wanted. It wanted India to be its main partner in the region. It had to settle with Pakistan because India was a bit independent in his thinking. Now India's aligned, but America's still not happy. India's not completely aligned. America now wants India to stand up against China. And what you find is India's got a deep relationship with China economically. So it's not completely playing ball, but this is basically the history. America deals with India by trying to woo her, by trying to win her over, to try and offer things. With Pakistan, she's the abused wife in the relationship. America goes to her when she needs her, but then other times she's swearing at her, she's abusing her. And the Pakistani leaders just can't see beyond America. They see no other option. They are won over by America. They've opened the country to America. So America is even involved domestically in Pakistan. You know, I mentioned, how do you control a country? America's involved at a state level, at a council level, at a provincial level, in the political medium. So it's going to be difficult for Pakistan to completely untangle from America. It's not impossible, but America's now put structures in place because Pakistan opened the country to her.
So I'm guessing it's wrong in saying that Pakistan is moving closer to China. Is it just purely economic deals that it has with China? For example, the CPEC.
Okay. So what happened was, when Pakistan started off with, we've got a communist threat, that included China, so there was no relationship with China. In 1962, India and China went to war in the Himalayas over a border dispute. In 1965, when Pakistan went to war with India and America put sanctions on Pakistan for using American equipment, that was when Pakistan then turned to China, because they've got the same enemy, which is India. So since then, China's been providing military equipment. There's a military economic relationship that's been growing. But interestingly, Pakistan's at war with India at the moment. China's at war with India in the Himalayas. In the history of this region, China and Pakistan have never gone to war with India at the same time and pulled India on two fronts. They've never done that. That would indicate they're cooperating and they're working together and they're allied together. The fact that that's not happened indicates to you that the relationship Pakistan has with China remains economic or to some degree military. Politically, Pakistan is in bed with America. Now that can change if America becomes weak or whatever, but a lot of people say this because it has economic relationship, but politically it's completely aligned with America. America's strategy for this region is to do with Afghanistan, is to do with Central Asia. Pakistan is completely aligned. On India even, Pakistan is not completely aligned with China. It doesn't open up a front against India when China's at war in the Himalayas. And that shows you that, so if China could do that, then you could say they're aligned and maybe Pakistan's an agent for China. At the moment, it just remains economic. And that's not a problem for America. If their agent needs money and it doesn't come from America, great, it's coming from somewhere else. As long as this country is politically aligned, remember what I said, as long as this country implements the political agenda of a foreign power, they're an agent and the power's happy with this. And Pakistan's been doing that. And actually, you know, Pakistan has been going well beyond that, despite the impact it's having on its country.
The other country in the region, which is of significance, is Bangladesh. Recently, Sheikh Hasina has been removed after many long years in power. Where does Bangladesh sit now?
So Bangladesh, or East Pakistan and West Pakistan, they were a creation of Britain. So the rule of these countries, Britain was familiar with them. So Pakistan obviously went with America. And then what you find was the East Pakistan, they maintained their links, because Bengal actually was where the British Empire began its occupation of the whole of India. So what you find is the ruling family, so Mujibur Rahman and his daughter Sheikh Hasina, they maintained their links with the UK. However, when Bangladesh was created, they got a lot of support from India. India, Pakistan had this divorce in 1947 that never got over. So every opportunity to undermine the other is what they did. And because West Pakistan did such a bad job of ruling over East Pakistan, a separatist movement started, and then they got independence, and they received a lot of help from India for this. And so since then, there's actually been a very close security relationship between the ruling family, Mujibur Rahman and his daughter, and India. So that's why sometimes it seems that Bangladesh is more aligned to India than it actually is to Britain. And obviously what we see now with Sheikh Hasina overthrown, the link with India is gone. That's why India is very unhappy. The link with Britain's gone completely. And the guy in power now, Muhammad Yunus, I mean, he couldn't be more Western, more American than anybody else. So, like the Middle East, what America's done in South Asia is completely uprooted the former colonial power there, Britain. They've completely been undermined. And that's where we are really in Bangladesh at the moment.
Turkey is an interesting one. It's been allied to the West since its inception. It's been trying to join the EU. It seems like it is independent. Many believe Erdogan is independent. What do you make of Turkey?
So Turkey was, modern Turkey was a British creation. And Mustafa Kemal, he ran the country with an iron fist internally. After him, his party and the military especially, they've continued with his policies. They aligned with the West during the Cold War. So even today, I think Turkey is one of the largest army in NATO as well. But what you find is the question is really about Erdogan and how independent he is or he isn't. So when we mentioned before the criteria, who brings you to power? And more importantly, do they have their own independent policies or are they implementing someone else's policies? So if we look in Syria, Turkey played a role. It's the one that put Ahmed al-Sharaa in power. And we talked about Ahmed al-Sharaa is basically America's guy. If you look at Libya, Turkey's got involved. Turkey's not come up with a new strategy. It's actually fitted very neatly into America's strategy. You look at Iraq, the Kurdish government is completely economically dependent upon Turkey. And so Turkey has stabilized the north of Iraq, which was the American agenda. We see also in the Caucasus, America wants to undermine any Russian influence and bring the oil-rich country closer to the West. That is exactly what Turkey has been doing. So Erdogan has actually done everything to make American and Western policies a success against any other powers. Now, the difference between Erdogan and most of the other rulers of the world is Erdogan's quite a capable politician. So he's able to implement America's agenda, but ensure he gets credit for it personally, that he's the one that implemented it. So he's the one that's powerful and he's an independent ruler. But you find that if you look at Erdogan, where does he propose anything that's completely new? What's his view on Palestine? Two-state solution. He gets involved in the talks. What's his view in Iraq? Well, America's created 3 federal autonomous nations and he's secured one of them. In Syria, he's backed one of the factions amongst many of the factions. So Erdogan not presented or executed anything new. What he's actually done is he neatly fits into what America's agenda is and he takes credit for it personally. So unlike the rulers in Pakistan or Egypt, when they do things for America, they're just not smooth or capable enough to take credit for it and the people see them as strong leaders. Erdogan is. And so that makes him look unique, but that's part of his cover. Really what he's doing is he's implementing America's agenda. So he is, in a way, a perfect agent ruler. He looks independent. He comes across Islamic. His people love him. And after all of that, he still implements America's agenda. So he's probably a good example of someone who could break free if he wanted to. He has a massive support base in the country. He's strong. He controls all the different institutions. Why is he not independent?
I was going to ask that question. Would you say that he has ambitions to be independent and he's just working towards that? I mean, a lot of people would make that argument.
So Erdogan's been in power since about 2001. So it's been 25 years, quarter of a century. So if he's playing the long game, it's a really, really long game. Look, he controls the parliament. His party controls it. He's been the president. He's been the prime minister. He controls the army now who are opposition to him. Why has he not got independent? What more can you do? He controls every strata of his country, every institution. He's got mass support. If you haven't done it, then that's not the agenda. It's as simple as that. He's achieved everything necessary to become independent. So why is he not doing it? Well, the only reason he's not doing it, that's not the agenda. His agenda is he's happy with power. He's happy for fame. He's happy to have a throne. And this is what all these rulers do. Why are they prepared to become slaves? They're prepared because that's how they get power. By reaching out to a foreign power, it's a secure way of getting the throne. And the difference with Erdogan and maybe Gamal Abdel Nasser was they won the street. They were very capable and they were able to navigate the political dynamics to appear as though that they're independent. But at the same time, they implemented all the agenda of America. So if there's a leader who's strong and independent, but he's got his own policies, then he's independent. If he's strong and he's independent, or he comes across independent, but everything happens to be in line with what America wants, that's not by accident, that's by design.
It might seem to the audience that every single country is an agent ruler of the US. So I'm going to add a few other areas. Central Asia, the likes of Kazakhstan, Tajikistan. These must be agent rulers for Russia, if I'm not mistaken.
So they were actually Soviet satellite states until the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991. And after the 1991 collapse, you saw the West became really interested in all the energy resources there. So you find Condoleezza Rice and Dick Cheney talking about the next Middle East is Central Asia. So what the West have done is through energy, they've tried to gain influence over the leadership there. The challenge America has had and the West is Russia still maintains a lot of influence there. If you look at all the rulers that took over after the Soviet Union, these were all former Communist Party members. You find that each of these countries has significant Russian population, which gives them Russia influence. Also, you find that economically, these countries are still aligned to Russia to some degree. So probably apart from Turkmenistan and Azerbaijan, they've become completely independent from Russia. What you find Kazakhstan is Kazakhstan is Russia's Egypt. Like Egypt is for America, Kazakhstan is like that for Russia. And what you find with Tajikistan, with Kyrgyzstan, with Uzbekistan, the struggle is still going on. But this is an area where Russia is more powerful. So you find that these countries are aligned. Ukraine is a good example. It became independent from the Soviet Union after 1991. The first couple of leaders were pro-Russia. They were aligned to Russia. And then the Orange Revolution happened. So what America did was it worked with and built a new generation of leaders that were loyal to it. So that is the ground from where Zelensky's come from. So these guys are all more, they have a Western orientation. They want to be more close to the West. And this is why you find that in the end, Russia had to invade Ukraine because it felt it had lost Ukraine. So Ukraine is actually a good example of when you lose your agent rulers, when you lose your influence, then you have to use military force. And military force has its drawbacks. So Central Asia largely is still under Russian influence and control, but this is a region that's been fought over currently.
I'm guessing Eastern Europe is similar as well, the likes of Belarus, Russian agents?
Yeah, so Ukraine, I mean, Belarus is quite open with its support for Russia. In fact, Belarus was a route that Russia took to go into Ukraine. And Belarus has actually agreed some deals where they've basically given some foreign policy elements directly to Russia, where Russia directly manages those things. So Belarus and Ukraine, well, Belarus probably the last remaining Eastern European directly linked to Russia. The rest have all been lost really to the West. If you look at the Czech Republic, Hungary, these sort of countries, they've all been lost now. These are all Western orientated.
The Far East, I'm guessing there's going to be a bit of a mix here. The likes of Indonesia, but then Laos, Vietnam, are they going to be more closely aligned to China?
So after World War II, so again, this region you find, China was occupied by Japan, but parts of China were occupied by the Europeans. Indochina, so Laos, Cambodia, Vietnam, these were occupied by France. Indonesia was occupied by Holland. So the Europeans lost all their colonies largely after World War II, but some of the ruling elite was still linked to Britain and France. So Vietnam, France lost every piece of architecture it had, and then America eventually took it over. America managed to then get influence over Indonesia. And what America did was it used the Cold War to win people over. So, in the Far East, the Cold War was between Russia, China, over the rest of the region. So anyone who was threatened by communism, America was prepared to help them establish a base there and put military equipment there. So America used that really to get into the institutions, the states, the different political parties and things like that. Now, obviously, with the rise of China, this is now a potential challenge to America. So some of these countries now, have to decide between America and China or declining America and China. And I'm sure we're going to talk about this, what is China doing about getting agent rulers? But for the moment, really, America is probably the dominant power in this region. However, the future of America's dominance is severely in question because of the rise of China. And China has said that it needs to dominate this region. It needs to get rid of foreign interference in the region.
It's an interesting question, and we will get to it maybe later on. I just want to go through some of the other major regions. Africa, I mean, there's been a lot of military coups recently. What do you make of Africa as a region?
Yeah, so Africa was literally taken over by Europe, and Britain got the lion's share. Then you had France, you had Belgium, you had Germany, but Britain and France were the dominant powers. And what you find is after World War II, America and the Soviet Union agreed on something, which is decolonization, which is these European powers have to give up their colonies and give them independence. And the whole idea behind that was for the Soviet Union, they were using imperialism and revolution as a way to get influence over African nations. And America was using decolonization, democracy, and freedom as a way to get influence over them and to reduce the influence of France and Britain. So what you find, North Africa, America managed to win Egypt, they're fighting over in Libya. And then you find when the war on terror started, America started using security to interfere in the region. So in the last 4 or 5 years, we've seen a number of coups in the Sahel region. Yeah, so Burkina Faso, you got Mali, you got a number of countries. And what you find is all of these soldiers are soldiers that America trained at some point in the past. So really, although people are saying these countries are becoming independent, all of these soldiers have been American trained at some point, and they're all doing coups against the French establishment. So Africa really is shifting from European control over to America, but we're still going through the process. It's still ongoing at the moment. There are still some countries that are aligned to Britain. There's some countries still aligned to France, because what these two countries did, they didn't just have ruling families. France has an economic setup where the reserves of countries linked to France, their currency reserves, are in the French central bank. So economically, France controls these countries. The Brits still are linked through military and economic and social relationships with a number of African countries. So America is using security, war on terror, terrorism, extremism as a way to try and get control. So this is ongoing at the moment.
Two countries that come to mind in particular because of their powerful rulers in the past is Libya and South Africa. So Libya with Gaddafi, he's always been seen as anti-imperial. Nelson Mandela, he's been seen as anti-imperial as well. What do you make of these two countries?
Yeah, so Libya was a country Britain created. Libya was a country Britain actually worked with Gaddafi, put him into power. And what happened is Gaddafi became a ruler who really supported British policies throughout Africa, and then also the Cold War strategy of pushing back against communism. So what Gaddafi did is he armed a lot of groups, he created a lot of groups where people went to Afghanistan to get militant training. In the 70s and early 80s, you went to Libya. Libya was the fertile ground, you got training, and then you went and carried out attacks in other countries. So when the neocons came to power at the end of the 1990s, their agenda was, which they were quite often about, is we want to do regime change in a number of countries to democratize them. So Libya, Iran, Iraq, Syria, and what a disaster these were. So what Tony Blair was able to do was he was able to get Gaddafi to give up his nuclear program, WMD program, and accept the compensation for the Lockerbie disaster. So as a result of bringing Gaddafi into the international community, America couldn't invade and do regime change. So that's why Gaddafi was a key asset really for Britain and Europe generally. And that's why when the Arab Spring happened, this was the best opportunity for America to interfere and finally get rid of him. But the battle for Libya is still going on currently. It's not settled. The British and the French have put former Gaddafi era officials into power, but you've got like 3 competing governments. One America backs, one the Europeans back, and they're still fighting it out. So South Africa is probably one of the richest countries in Africa. And really the apartheid regime was backed by Britain. When Britain could see the apartheid regime can't last, they changed track and they backed Nelson Mandela and the ANC. And we've got to remember that, the ANC, the agreement they made with the white ruling class was politically the country will change, economically it won't. Economically, the wealth will remain with the white landowning class. Politically, obviously, Nelson Mandela took over. South Africa still actually remains close to Britain. America's not been able to win it over. But what you find is South Africa's got so many internal issues now, it can't really do much in the broader region. In the past, it actually could, and there was a bright future for it. The country has got so many economic and internal issues. Even though it's an agent for Britain, there's nothing much Britain can do with it because there's too many internal issues it's got to focus on.
What do you make of Latin America? I mean, in more recent years, Russia, China, even Iran, to an extent, they've growing their influence in this region.
So America in the past, they had the Monroe Doctrine, which was they don't accept any European presence or control in the Americas. So since then, really, this region's actually been far away from global struggle. There's not been really much struggle over it because America's got it under control. However, America doesn't run it like a colony. Latin America, to a large degree, is independent. The rulers have got nothing to do with America. They run the country. However, you don't see Britain, France, or these other countries trying to compete with America in it. So despite the economic relations Russia, China, and Iran have, politically, these countries have no influence over these countries. Even Hugo Chavez, who was completely anti-American, his biggest customer was still America. So Latin America isn't a traditional arena where there's a global struggle of different powers. What you've got is America's there. Because for America, the way to maintain North America was to kick the Europeans out. So they kicked the Europeans out of North America, then they kicked them out of South America. So as far as this remains like that, America's more than happy to leave it how it is. So America doesn't directly engage too much in terms of politically in South America. However, as long as other countries don't use it as a springboard, America doesn't really care from that perspective. So there is a bit of an antagonistic relationship between America and Latin America. Mexico is one of America's largest trading partners. So is Canada. But what you find, America sees Eurasia as the key region in the world. America looks at the world and it sees that a power that will challenge us will emerge from Eurasia. That's where the Europeans are. It's where China is where Russia is. So technically, Latin America is not a client for America. However, it's not a client for anybody, and that suits America.
One of the last areas I wanted to discuss is Europe. So you find that a lot of the countries, the agent rulers, they're agents for powers in Europe. For example, France, Britain. What is Europe quite independent in that sense?
So Europe's quite interesting, actually. If you look, Europe is an independent region. You've got powerful countries. You've got France, Britain, you've got Germany, you've got Scandinavia countries, you've got Spain, Italy, a lot of individual countries that are quite powerful. But what you find is, as we're seeing recently with Trump now in power, is when America says we're not going to provide you security, there's a problem, which indicates to you they were actually dependent upon American security. So although Britain and France compete with America in different parts of the world, what you find, America actually has significant influence within Europe in terms of the investment it's put there, its companies there, the security alliance that the region actually has. So I've actually come more to the conclusion that actually Europe isn't that independent. If you look at Germany, America told it to break its energy relationship with Russia due to Ukraine. Germany did it, and now it's got an economic crisis. Now, if you look at it from a raw interest perspective, Germany should have been with Russia. It has an economic relationship, it has an energy relationship. Then why did it go with America? But that's the level of influence America has. If you look at the Eastern European countries, America has bilateral deals with them, which actually undermine the EU. I will say America has a lot of influence over Europe, although there are some independent countries. What I wouldn't say is Europe is this independent region and every country is independent, but it clearly isn't.
I just wanted to ask you about some specific countries that we've not really highlighted. Japan, for instance. I mean, it had an empire of its own back in the days.
Yeah, so Japan, America occupied. America put a political party in power. America's really controlled it, really. So although America allows Japan to run independently, the reality is Japan is completely linked to America. Now it suits America that Japan operates independently as a counterweight to China. So you find both the two countries America occupied, Germany and Japan, very quickly established a political system for them and then left them to it. But that political system makes them dependent upon America.
The other country is UK. I mean, that's where we're from, so it's quite significant. What do you make of UK?
Okay, so you would think the UK is independent, it's an independent country, has its own policies, even competes with America. However, there's a few things that actually say otherwise. Firstly, we find from a security perspective, it depends upon America, depends upon NATO. It literally can't do anything on its own. What you also find is a few of the inquiries that happened over the years, the Chilcot inquiry, which looked at the Iraq War, it really showed the level of influence America actually has, because the government had already agreed to the Iraq War, despite saying we're against America. So what you actually find is the elites in this country are intertwined with America, which begs the question, how independent really is the UK from America? So, I wouldn't even say now, does Britain really even compete with America in different regions of the world? What you find in a lot of issues around the world, Britain just joins America because they feel this is the best we can do now to get anything. So I would say maybe 10, 15 years ago, Britain was an independent nation. I'm more of the opinion Britain's gone more over to being influenced by America now, because they can't do anything really without America. It may say so, it can. It may have some rulers in some countries that can stand up to America. But if you look at the Gulf nations, all of these were Britain's creations, and Britain's got no choice but to accept that these families are going to work with America, because if they don't, America will just overthrow them. So I question how independent the UK really is from America.
So, are you saying that countries can be to varying different degrees an agent for another country? Can it be an agent to multiple different countries? Can it also be an agent in some aspects and not in other aspects?
See, what agency is I want you to implement my agenda. So if he's an agent to multiple countries, then the powers will have differing agendas. So it wouldn't work. The second thing is sometimes you do get, for example, if you take Iran, I've said today Iran is really an American agent. But you look at the nuclear deals, it's been the European countries that have been doing it. But that's because on that issue, the European countries and America are on the same page. So America has no problem outsourcing it to them. So when you have multiple countries, what you find is one country is still the master. The other countries are working to implement the agenda of that country. So the European countries do this. This is probably another evidence that how independent are the European countries. Because if you look at Iran, if you look at Israel, all of them become part of America's broader agenda. Now, they do this not because they're agents, but they do it because they believe this is the best way to maintain influential in the world. But that would be the route to how you become an agent in the long run.
But going back to the UK, we did previously mention that the UK does have its own agent rulers within, for example, Africa. So how is it an agent ruler to the US, but then at the same time competing with the US in the likes of Africa?
Yeah, so what it would mean is because it implements America's agenda in some places, on those issues, it's an agent, whilst in other places it doesn't. Now, this is quite unique because most agents, they rely upon the power. So they can't do anything against the power anyway. So this is why these European countries are in a bit of a unique scenario. America uses the global order. It uses investment and security to have influence over them. So that's why you find on many issues, they've got no choice but to go along with America. But on other issues, they stand up against America. And this is quite unique to the Europeans because they've obviously been imperial nations in the past, and they've had their own agent rulers. So you don't see this happening in Pakistan, in India, in Bangladesh, in Turkey. You don't see this where they stand up against America in one region, but work with America in another region. It doesn't work like that. With the Europeans, you do. And that's probably because we're still at that transition stage where Europeans still have some influence, although it's waning.
What about Russia and China? We've briefly mentioned some of the countries that are agent rulers for them. Have they been really able to change any more nations into agents over the last few years?
So they're trying, especially Russia and China. Russia and China are really trying with Iran to try and win her over. Russia and China are both trying in Latin America with their security and energy and economic relationships. In Central Asia, Russia and China are both working with these countries to try and win them over. The West are still trying to do it as well. But they've not really had much success yet. Even if you look at Iran, Iran still wants to talk to America. It realizes working for or with America is better for it. If you look at Pakistan, despite its relationship with China, the money China's thrown at it, Pakistan is firmly in bed with America. If you look at the African countries also, China's thrown a lot of money at them. China's put more money in Africa, more development finance than America ever has. But you find politically, China hasn't been able to win them over. So China's at it, it's trying to, but it's not been successful. In many ways, China and Russia in the position of the Soviet Union, well, the Soviet Union wanted to win agent rulers over. It won some, but many it didn't. It tried to win Gamal Abdel Nasser, it fell to. It tried to win the Turkish leadership and Syrian leadership, it didn't. But it kept at it. It backed groups, backed proxy groups. It armed countries in the hope to try and win them over. So you find, Russia, China offering finance, infrastructure. Russia's offering loans, and most of the time it's offering military equipment as a way to try and win them. But at the moment, there's not one country. Well, in the case of China, I can't point to one country where it is an agent for them. For Russia, okay, Ukraine, Belarus, or some of these Central Asian countries. But really what you find is Russia's just holding on it at the moment. Russia's not going to be expanding its list of agent rulers going forward.
My final question is about Israel. It seems to get away with absolutely everything. Gets away with murder, gets away with genocide, and it has a lot of influence in the US. How do we understand this kind of relationship?
So Israel is it's a bit of a unique, Israel is an agent for America, but it's a very unique agent and its situation is quite unique. So Israel was a creation of Britain when Britain occupied Palestine. And the whole idea is Israel would become an outpost in the Middle East. So this was done once before by the Europeans in the Crusader era, where Saladin Ayyubi put an end to it. So Israel's the modern version of that Crusader state. So it becomes your forward base in the Middle East. So Britain then obviously its influence waned, and then America came in, and America's continued with that. So what America's done has invested in Israel. He's developed his military, he's developed his economy, shares technology with it. Basically, Israel is its baby, it's his child, he's raised it. And when your child is naughty, when it talks against you, you treat it like your child. Yeah, you try to bring her aside, you try to win her, you warn her, you discipline her. Now that's very different to how America deals with other agent rulers. It disciplines them, it slaps them. In the case of Pakistan, it treats her partner really, really badly. In the case of Israel, you find they don't do that. And there's a reason for that. Israel is dependent. Just look at this fact. Israel, well, the Jews, the Zionists, they constitute about 6-7 million population. The Middle East population is 500 million. So Israel is completely outnumbered. Water, electricity, gas, the region has more than Israel does. So Israel completely depends upon Western support, Western markets in order to survive. So if America undermines Israel, all the 7 decades of investment goes down the drain. So what does America do is when Israel goes too far, what do they do? It sits down, it talks to her, tries to explain to her. It doesn't deal with her like another country. So that automatically promotes to people that Israel is very powerful. Now, the other thing Israel's done is very similar to what Egypt, Indonesia, Turkey, Pakistan have done. They've opened the country to America. So American officials, ambassadors come to the country. They meet the army generals, they meet soldiers, they meet civil society, they meet the opposition. So they're able to gain influence and win loyalty. America has done that with Israel. They've opened up America to Israel. So what Israel's done is set up lobby groups. It's got support amongst evangelical Christians, so it keeps meeting them. So as a result, pro-Zionist forces in America do a lot of lobbying for Israel. And they say this is good for America. By supporting Israel, this can only be good for America. But we're seeing, obviously, for the last 18 months, the opposing views now coming out. So America's got a problem actually going forward with Israel. Israel's being accused of a genocide. Israel defending itself it has completely failed. Its propaganda wars completely failed. So actually, going forward, Israel's making America look bad. So do you drop her like you would do another agent ruler? But the question America has is if we drop Israel, that's 7 decades worth of investment going down the drain. Secondly, yes, America's got Saudi, the Gulf states, Jordan, all these other countries, but they're Muslims. Their populations hate them as well. They're only empowers of America. So Israel's quite unique in that they're Western, they're European. But remember, even Americans in origin are Europeans. So they can't trust the Saud family. They can't trust the other Muslim rulers because they can get overthrown any time by their people. Israel is actually different from that perspective. That's what makes it unique. So Israel in many ways is a unique case of an agent ruler. It is more dependent upon America than its other agents, but America deals with it very differently compared to the other agent rulers.
When you say America can't just drop Israel, I mean, it wouldn't ever drop any of its countries, but rather it would just go for regime change or support the opposition. Why doesn't it do that in the case of Netanyahu? Not to say that would actually create a different Israel that doesn't have those expansionist ambitions, but it would have a different flavor to it.
So, for the West here, Israel being a secure country, if Israel's security means it needs to expand a little bit, they don't have a problem with that. So when Israel's now taking over genocide, despite the statements, America's still been arming Israel to do this. They don't really have a problem with it. The problem potentially they do have with Israel is, America sees Israel in defined borders and America's not sharing the region with Israel. Obviously, Israel has an agenda, it wants to be much more bigger. But to do that, Israel needs American support and help, which it won't get. Even if you look at Iran, Israel's completely against the nuclear deal. Israel doesn't want Iran to have any nuclear enrichment capabilities. Israel wants to go to war with Iran, take out the nuclear sites, but it needs America for it, and America doesn't want to do that. America has other interests. And in fact, America sees Iran's 100 million population as something it can use in the future. So there you've got clear differences in interests. But Israel pushes America more than any other leader because of these special privileges it has in America. On the other hand, America deals with Israel like a naughty child rather than a disciplined child that needs to be disciplined and reminded who the boss is. So interestingly, with Israel, in reality, it is a master and slave relationship, but for all practical purposes, it's not. Whilst with other rulers, the rulers have capability, they have influence, they have power, but it's a master-slave relationship.
Thank you for your time today, Adnan. A lot to kind of take in, absorb. The audience, if you want to learn more about the issues we've raised today, definitely check out our website, www.thegeopolitics.com. You can also learn on many other issues by accessing our website. You'll find comprehensive insights, analysis, articles, and deep dives. I'm Yusuf. Thank you for listening.